When you buy a budget-friendly uninterruptible power supply, the story often ends the moment you plug it in and realize it can't actually keep the devices you need alive long enough to protect data or finish a movie. I've seen people swap a cheap $50 unit for a more expensive one only to discover the cheaper model never kicked in when the grid flickered, and the disappointment turns into a regret that lingers for weeks. That's why, before I even pulled the TRIPP LITE SmartPro SMX2200XLRT2U out of the box, I asked myself, is this the kind of smarter buy that actually delivers when you need it, or is it just another flash-in-the-pan gadget? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The first thing I noticed about the SmartPro is how it positions itself in the market. At 2200VA and 220V, it's marketed as a step up from the 500-800VA home units that many people start with, promising enough juice to keep a small home office, a gaming rig, or a home theater system humming through a brownout. What makes that claim worth testing isn't just the raw wattage, but the suite of features that come built-in: an audible alarm, an emergency power-off button, automatic voltage regulation, and LED indicators that let you see at a glance what's happening. Those items sound good on paper, but the real question is whether they translate into everyday peace of mind. I set the UPS up in 3 different scenarios to see how it behaved. First, I plugged it into a modest home office with a desktop, a 27-inch monitor, and a Wi-Fi router. The moment I hit the power button, the LEDs lit up green, confirming that input voltage was within the acceptable range. I then simulated a power loss by pulling the plug on the wall. The audible alarm chirped almost instantly well before the lights on my desk went dark. The UPS transferred power to the connected devices without a noticeable hiccup. My computer stayed on, the monitor kept displaying, and the router didn't drop the connection. For a home office, that reliability matters because a single minute of downtime can mean losing a partially written document or missing a deadline. In that respect, the SmartPro delivered exactly what it promised. The second test involved my living room home theater setup, which includes a 55-inch OLED TV, a soundbar, a streaming stick, and a small console. Because those devices draw more power than a typical desktop, I wanted to verify that the 2200VA rating wasn't just a marketing exaggeration. I powered them all through the UPS and again caused a short outage. The alarm went off, and this time the transition was a fraction of a second longer, still under half a second, but noticeable if you're watching a live sports event. The TV stayed on, the soundbar continued playing, and the console didn't reset. I did notice that after about 6 minutes of continuous power, the UPS's battery indicator started to shift from green to amber. That's a practical cue. The SmartPro can sustain a full home theater load for roughly 5 to 7 minutes, which is enough time to pause and save your spot, but not enough for extended outages. If you expect to use it as a primary power source for long blackouts, you'll need a larger battery backup or a generator. Finally, I tried it with a small home workshop where I run a 3D printer and a few low-power tools. Here the automatic voltage regulation, AVR, showed its value. In my neighborhood, the grid can sometimes dip to 190V during heavy load periods, which can cause certain tools to behave erratically. The SmartPro's AVR kicked in automatically, smoothing the input voltage so my printer maintained a constant temperature. The LED indicator turned yellow to show that regulation was active, but the devices kept running without glitching. For anyone who's sensitive to voltage fluctuations, especially hobbyists working with precise equipment, this feature can be a silent lifesaver. Now, let's talk about the downsides that only become clear after you live with the unit for a few weeks. The first is the size and weight. At 2200VA, the unit is fairly bulky and sits on the floor like a small suitcase. It isn't something you'll want to tuck under a desk or in a cramped closet. You need a dedicated spot where the cables can hang loosely. The included cables are helpful, but they're all the same length, and you'll likely need a longer power cord for the TV or a more flexible extension for the router. The design doesn't include modular cable management, so you end up with a tangle of cords that can look messy. Another practical trade-off is the battery life. The manufacturers claim a decent runtime, but the real-world tests show that once the battery is past half charge, the UPS starts to beep more frequently, and the LED indicator flashes a warning. The unit doesn't have a user-replaceable battery. You'll have to send it back to the manufacturer or a service center when the cells degrade. For a device that sits in a living room or office for years, that could become